1857, India's first war of independence. The time was 1757. A dark shadow was slowly spreading over the sky of India. A commercial organization called the British East India Company came only to trade in spices and silk, but they quickly became a colonial power. After the fall of the Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Dowlah, through the Battle of Plassey, the company seized complete control over the economy, administration, and army of Bengal. Then, one by one, they occupied Bihar, Orissa, Madras, Maharashtra, Punjab. Not only trade, they established complete control over state power. They were throwing out local kings one by one through a rule called the doctrine of lapse, the essence of which was, if a king died without leaving a pure successor, his kingdom would go to the British. Under this rule, the kingdom of Rani, Lakshmibai of Jhansi, Nagpur, Satara, Awadh, and numerous other states fell into the hands of the British. The British rule's oppression and social humiliation. The British were not just ruling, they were also attacking Indian culture, religion, and social structure. English missionaries secretly began converting Hindus and Muslims. Religious education was being abolished in schools, and Christian values were being taught. The education system, clothing, justice, all were being changed. Land was being taken away from landlords. The tax burden was increasing, farmers were being wiped out, and famine was occurring in cities and villages. The greatest humiliation was inflicted on the soldiers, the beginning of resentment among the sepoys. The East India Company's army had millions of Indian sepoys, soldiers, with whom the entire British rule was sustained. But the lives of those sepoys were filled with indescribable suffering, low pay, no promotion to higher positions, and not even the slightest respect. In 1856, Lord Canning introduced the General Service Enlistment Act, which allowed Indian sepoys to fight abroad, especially in Burma and Afghanistan. According to Hindus, crossing the sea meant losing one's caste. Muslim soldiers also objected to this. Then came the terrible spark, the Enfield rifle cartridge scandal. A new gun was introduced, the Enfield P-53, whose cartridge was accused of using animal fat, cow and pig. The cartridge had to be cut with the teeth of the cannon first. Cows are sacred to Hindus, pigs are impure to Muslims. As a result, sepoys of both religions became angry. Mangal Pandey, the first fire. On March 29, 1857, a brave sepoy, Mangal Pandey, pointed a gun at British officers at the Barrackpore cantonment. He shouted, "This English rule will not be tolerated any longer. Our religion, life, honour, they are taking everything away." He shot the English officer, then was himself shot. Mangal Pandey was hanged on April 8th. But the fire had already burned inside. The mind, inside the enmity, inside the accumulated insults. Starting from Bengal, anger is spreading like an invisible stream to Meerut, Kanpur, Delhi, Lucknow, Jhansi, everywhere. The sepoys are ready, the kings are terrified, the common people are waiting for a rebellion, an explosion, a revolution. This was the first fire, the first blood, the first language of betrayal. 1857, India's first war of independence, Meerut Rebellion, and the flag of Delhi date, May 10th, 1857. Place: Meerut Cantonment, a quiet town in northern India. But that night would make history. A few days earlier, 85 Indian sepoys had been arrested by the British for refusing to use the cartridges of their Enfield rifles. They were publicly punished, they were imprisoned and humiliated in jail cells. This incident set fire to the hearts of the sepoys. On the afternoon of May 10th, the sepoys suddenly declared a mutiny. They broke the jail, freed their fellow sepoys. Then, with guns, swords, and sticks in their hands, they advanced towards the residence of the British officers. The fire of Meerut reached Delhi. Blood was shed in Meerut. British officers were killed. The common people, especially farmers and workers, also joined the mutiny. The rebels understood that this rebellion would be successful only when an Indian face was placed on the throne of Delhi. They had one name in mind: Bahadur Shah Zafar, the last emperor of the Mughal Empire, who was then living an old and neutral life in the Red Fort of Delhi. On the morning of May 11th, a group of sepoys from Meerut entered Delhi. They arrived at the Red Fort and requested Emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar, "We are your sepoys, you be our emperor. Let this country be under your rule again." Bahadur Shah was hesitant at first. He was old, sick, far from politics. But then when lakhs of sepoys, common people and former soldiers gathered in front of his palace, he agreed. A historic declaration of unity was made. India is independent. British rule is over. Bahadur Shah Zafar is now on the throne of Delhi. The wave of rebellion spread. The news of the fall of Delhi spread like wildfire. The British were alarmed. They thought it might be a temporary rebellion, but they realized that it was taking the form of a large armed movement. One by one, the rebellion joined. Lucknow. After the fall of Nawab Wajid Ali Shah, members of the Nawab family and soldiers, angry, took up arms against the British. Jhansi. Rani Lakshmibai declared, "I will not give up my Jhansi." She also joined the rebellion. Kanpur. Nanasaheb, a descendant of Peshwa, declared himself the Maratha leader. His commander, Tatiya Topi, became a legend of the rebellion. Faizabad, Bareilly, Etawah, Gwalior, Bihar, Patna. The rebellion spread everywhere. Not only the sepoys, peasants, labourers, landlords, beggars, Brahmins, Muslims, Rajputs, Marathas, people of all classes and professions joined in. British resistance and terror. The British rulers quickly organised themselves. They brought new troops from Calcutta, Madras and Punjab. British troops arrived by ship from Europe. Their plan? To recapture Delhi to suppress the rebellion. They began a brutal retaliation. Villages were burned, suspects were shot dead, the bodies of the rebels were hung in the streets so that others would be afraid. But that fear was no longer working because the whole of India had awakened by then. Delhi was the center of the rebellion. Bahadur Shah Zafar had once again become a symbol of Hindu-Muslim unity. The rebels were calling for liberation of the motherland instead of jihad and religious war against the British. But the British had only one goal: to recapture Delhi. The war was about to begin, a terrible war with the British army armed with weapons, cannons and ammunition on one side, and the awakening of the common people on the other. Siege of Delhi, and the struggle of the sepoys, fall of Delhi, and the joy of the rebels. May 11, 1857, the rebel sepoys entered Delhi. They captured the city and entered the Red Fort and called on Emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar to lead the rebellion. Although the emperor was hesitant at first, he finally decided in favor of the rebellion. He declared, through his Raj Sabha, "I am the emperor of the Indians." English rule is over from today. The common people of Delhi also joined the rebellion. Shopkeepers, blacksmiths, potters, farmers, everyone was given weapons. Delhi became the sincere and historical base of the rebellion. But problems arise: leadership and lack of discipline. The rebellion began with intense passion and anger, but it took an organized war to wage. War strategy weapons, supply infrastructure controlled leadership. This is where the major weakness of the sepoys lies. Bahadur Shah Zafar was a royalist, but he had no experience in conducting war. There was no specific chief among the sepoys either. The rebels lacked leadership to plan an organized military campaign against the British. The British began to retaliate. Meanwhile, the British decided that if Delhi was not captured, the rebellion would not stop. They sent troops from the Punjab, where they were still strong. The British commander there was General John Nicholson. He was cruel, loyal, and very harsh on the Indians. The British army advanced from the Punjab towards Delhi with about 4,000 soldiers. June 18, 1857, the siege of Delhi began. The Siege of Delhi, a brutal chapter in history. The British forces besieged Delhi for 4 months. Every day, cannonballs and gunshots were fired at the city. The rebel sepoys, common people, and even women and children inside the city were affected. The city's food supply was cut off. There was a shortage of drinking water. On the one hand, there was bloodshed under the pressure of the enemy forces, and on the other hand, there was hunger, water shortage, and fear. But the rebels did not give up. They resisted in every street, every house, and every alley of the city. The brave fight of the rebels. The defense of Delhi was in the hands of Bakht Khan. He was a sepoy leader who organized resistance with courage and prudence. Many local leaders joined him, who themselves left their areas and came to Delhi to join. The rebellion. They established a secret communication system. Relief camps, hospitals, and small weapons factories were built inside the city. But the end was not saved. September 1857. 4 months later, the British Army launched a major attack. Through the Kashmir Gate of Delhi, they entered the city. A fierce civil war-like battle began. The sepoys put up a bloody resistance on every street, every wall in every house, mosque, and temple. Yet the rebels, who were outnumbered and outgunned, could not hold out in the end. On September 20th, 1857, Bahadur Shah Zafar surrendered. His sons were shot dead near the Khizrabad Gate outside Delhi. Zafar was captured by the British and taken to Rangoon, now Yangon, Myanmar, where he spent the rest of his life in exile and died. After the fall of Delhi, the rebellion did not collapse. Rather, it spread to other parts of India. Jhansi, Kanpur, Lucknow, Bihar. But the fall of Delhi was a psychological blow. The rebels understood that the British would now take even more brutal revenge. What was that revenge like? How terrible was the Battle of Lucknow or Jhansi? How did Rani, Lakshmibai and Tatiya, Topi continue the war? Kanpur massacre, Nanasaheb's revenge, and the Battle of Lucknow Kanpur. The city that became the center of the war, Kanpur, became one of the centers of the rebellion along with Delhi. The leader here was Nanasaheb Peshwa. He was the foster son of Peshwa Bajirao. The British stopped his pension, which deeply humiliated him. So as soon as the rebellion started, he took up arms against the British. His right hand was Tatiya Topi, a smart and fearsome warrior. Outbreak of the rebellion and surrender of the British Army, June 18, 1857. The rebels of Kanpur, led by Nanasaheb, surrounded the British cantonment. About 900 British soldiers, several thousand people, including women and children, were surrounded. After an 18-day siege, the British surrendered. The condition was that they would be sent safely to Allahabad. Nanasaheb arranged for them to be sent to Satichura Ghat. But here, a confusing and tragic incident occurred. Satichura Ghat massacre. Mystery and revenge. The British were taken on a boat. Just then the firing suddenly started. Who started the firing? It is still a historical debate. Some say that the rebel soldiers did it out of revenge. Some say that Nanasaheb did not give the order. As a result, many of the British men were killed on the spot. The women and children were captured and brought to Kanpur and kept in a small room called Bibigar. Retaliatory killings, as the British army was advancing from Allahabad to retake Kanpur. The rebels became nervous. They were afraid that if these women and children were freed, they would side with the British. July 15th, 1857, the women and children were killed in a brutal decision. This incident created great hatred in Europe for the Indian rebels. British revenge, horror, and brutality. On July 18th, the British army entered Kanpur. They were infuriated by the sight of the blood-stained houses of dead British women and children. Then began a terrible massacre. Hundreds of Indians were killed on suspicion. They were hanged from trees, tied to cannons and blown up. Village after village was burned. The British commanders, Havelock and Neil, were the main protagonists of this barbarity. Battle of Lucknow. Resistance of the rebels and siege of the city Lucknow was the ancient capital of the Nawabs. Nawab Wajid Ali Shah had already been sent into exile. His wife Begum Hazrat Mahal and soldier Bir Bakhsh Singh led the rebellion. They laid siege to the Residency, British administrative building. The British commander Henry Lawrence was killed by the rebels. Street fighting breaks out across the city. British danger and recovery operation. British bring in troops again, led by Colin Campbell. A 2-month battle to retake Lucknow ensues, in which thousands die. The British army defeats the rebels with sophisticated weapons, artillery, and traditional tactics. Begum Hazrat Mahal retreats to Nepal but does not surrender. Rani Lakshmibai and the Battle of Jhansi. The British told Rani Lakshmibai they will take over Jhansi after your husband's death. She protested strongly and declared, "I will not give up my Jhansi." She secretly organizes an army, trains women warriors. March 1858, British forces attack Jhansi. The city is defended for about 10 days under the leadership of the Rani. In the end, the city fell, but the Queen rode out on horseback, her son strapped to her back, and fought. She went to Gwalior and joined Tatiya Topi there. The rebels lost one city after another between 1857-58. However, the histories of Jhansi, Lucknow, and Kanpur became an inspiration for later generations. The rebels knew they might not win, but they fought with their heads held high. This war was for the identity and honor of the nation. Tatiya Topi's guerrilla warfare, the rebels' last resistance, and the British's revenge, Tatiya Topi. The last fire of the rebellion after the fall of Jhansi. The one who kept the fire of the rebellion alive was Tatiya Topi. After fleeing from Jhansi, he started a fierce guerrilla war across the vast region of Gwalior, Rajputana, Madhya Pradesh, Bihar, and Uttar Pradesh. His war strategy: cut off the British's supplies, cut off and isolate the railways and telegraphs, attack different places simultaneously with small troops, distract the British army by changing positions quickly. The British sent more than 10 army convoys against him, but he repeatedly deceived them with his judgment, courage, and patriotism. British revenge and genocide. Meanwhile, the British wanted not only to suppress this rebellion, but to wipe it out from the face of India. They issued an order: wherever there is suspicion of rebellion, there is destruction. The result was, village after village was set on fire, British soldiers were going to the localities and killing people indiscriminately. Religious places were also being entered and destroyed. Hundreds of people were being hanged from trees and sentenced to death. The fear of tying them in front of the gun and blowing them up was spread throughout the country. This was a psychological war, so that the Indians became afraid and became silent again. The last days of Tatiya Topi. At the end of 1858, some treachery began among Tatiya Topi's followers. A close man-lion betrayed him to the British. He was imprisoned and tried in a military court in Jhansi and sentenced to death. On April 18, 1859, he was hanged. His last words were, "I am dying, but India will rise again." Isolated rebellions and surrender of kings. At this time, many small rebel groups scattered in Bihar, Varanasi, Chhattisgarh, Assam, Rajasthan were also resisting. But they were gradually defeated due to lack of weapons, food, organized leadership, and public support. Many kings and landowners compromised with the British. Some took rewards by giving information about the rebels. The new decision of the British, rule by the king and queen, not the company, in 1858. The British government realized that it was dangerous to rule through the East India Company. They announced a new law in the name of Queen Victoria. The company's rule in India is over. From now on, the British Crown will rule India directly. A viceroy will rule India on behalf of the Queen. It was during this time that Queen Victoria's famous declaration came. We will protect the religion, culture, and property of our Indian subjects, but in reality, exploitation increased, taxes increased, new forms of political and economic control were imposed on Indians. Last words of this episode: the rebellion failed, but the fire was not extinguished. This great rebellion of 1857 failed militarily, but it was the first organized call for independence. For the first time, Hindus and Muslims fought together. For the first time, ordinary farmers, kings, sepoys, women, all took up arms. This rebellion planted the seeds of the subsequent freedom movement. Last comment: as history progresses, rebellions are born. The rebellion of 1857 was never completely extinguished. It returned in Gandhiji's non-violent movement, in Netaji's armed struggle with the inspiration of Subhash Bose, Khudiram, Bhagat Singh, Master Da Surya Sen. None of them forgot the war of 1857, because that war was India's first cry. We will not be subjugated. Through this story, you will experience a continuous, detailed, honest, and terrifying history, which was not just a rebellion, but a battle for a nation's identity.